You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the capitalist corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the capitalist corner.
Welcome to the Capitalist Corner, folks. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, here today with the inimitable James Stevens Valliant. We've got a great show for you. I've got a great episode of the Michael Liebowitz Show out right now, interviewing Professor Mario De Caro on the free will problem. Check it out. Very informative. Very nice guy, too. Great discussion. Remember, we love the super chats, super stickers. We might get into other topics because I did send Jim other articles. Hi, Amy. But I really kind of want to dig into this individualism versus collectivism thing. You know, with this rise of post-liberalism and the collectivist left, there seems to be very few of us individualists remaining. And Jim, I got to say, and you could tell me your thoughts on this, a lot of the debates that I have, it's very difficult to have a debate sometimes, because if you want to debate politics, for instance, if you have fundamentally different worldviews, for instance, if one person's an individualist and the other is a collectivist, you end up talking past each other because you don't have a foundation from which to start. So in my view, it's always best to go back to foundations, go back to what's your standard of value when it comes to ethics. What is your method of knowledge? Are individuals, is the individual the fundamental unit of observation or the fundamental unit of society, or is there some broader thing? So I want to talk to you about a few things. First, I want you to tell me, what is this post-liberalist crap?
It's a truly evil resurrection of the most primordial kind of mysticism and collectivism you can imagine, spearheaded by, quote, intellectuals, end quote, like Patrick Deneen. It basically is an assault, an all-out assault on the Enlightenment, on the rational approach to knowing, on the cherishing of the individual as an irreplaceable, as an end in himself, an irreplaceable value that, you know, the Enlightenment put the individual on the map, cleared out just centuries of ridiculous, blowing the dust off of centuries of ridiculous collectivism. This attack on liberalism, with the word, don't be confused by modern American political liberals who advocate the welfare state. No. True liberalism was thought of as the Enlightenment view of things, a view of individual liberty being important, a view of generally oriented around the free market, the original assault on slavery as an institution, mind you, the beginnings of what we call modernity. And that is exactly what these critics don't like. They do not like modern attitudes. We're slipping into a kind of decadence in their view. The contemporary world is got all kinds of problems, and they blame those problems on individualism and the Enlightenment, in effect.
Okay, and there seems to be two versions of this. One that repudiates the founding of the United States, and the other that tries to usurp the founding of the United States.
Yes, much more insidious, the second there, yes.
I think so too, but why do you think so?
Well, because truly they are against the founding fathers. The Patrick Deneens and J.D. Vance can be rah-rah, I'm a Republican, and wave his flag all he likes. But his philosophy and this assault on liberalism is an assault on James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. The very ideas of the Declaration of Independence are what they hate so much. Individualism, an Enlightenment approach. That is exactly what they hate, if they were being honest. But of course, they're not honest. And to slide this into the American consciousness, they have to sort of disguise this primordial collectivism as something American. And so J.D. Vance at the Republican Convention, America is not these ideals that you'll read about in the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights. No, it's an actual people. It's the actual soil. It's blood and soil kind of collectivism. You are a people, and there's a whole idea of heritage Americans coming out now. Michael, I am more of an American than you are, because more of my ancestors go back to the 1600s. I could probably claim that. A great many of my ancestors came in the 1600s. I just come from a very old family. This gives me no more claim to America as someone who arrived yesterday. It is absurd. It is evil. It is anti-American. America is about the individual. America is about all the things that they oppose. That's what America is. And you know something? Look, if the family is, let me go back to some of the problems they're saying. If the family is decaying, let's say that there's a complex series of issues here, and they're jumbling all together in a package deal. So if modern laws have made it easier for women to divorce their abusive husbands, I call that progress. If you want to make it harder for people, because you're protecting the family, harder for people to get divorced, consider what you're doing. Now, another part of this package deal is the welfare state. Has the welfare state encouraged families to break up? Yes, that's not a product of liberalism. That's a product of the welfare state. So what they'll do is they'll package deal a bunch of things. We believe in family. Now, of course, if you're an objectivist, family is a conditional value. If you come from an abusive family, you have no obligation to love them, to protect them, to do anything for them. Okay, I did not come from an abusive family. I think my parents went above and beyond their moral obligation to me as parents. And so I respect and admire and am grateful to my parents. But family is a conditional value, says Ayn Rand. It's not one of these unconditional religious intrinsic values. That's what they want. Now consider
Jim, hold on one second. I want to just comment on the family thing, because something happened recently that I found very interesting. I went with my friend, Diana and I went on a double date with my friend and his wife. Now, his wife is a Palestinian American, so when it came time to get into his vehicle, my thinking all my life is she's the wife. She gets up front with her husband. I sit in the back with my girlfriend. So I got in the back. She opened the back door and saw me and was very surprised. And she said, "Oh, don't worry." And she went and got in the front passenger seat. As we were leaving, when it was time to leave, she said, "Oh, I'll sit in the back." And he explained to me, in Arabic culture, the woman always sits in the back if there's a man. So I said, okay. But, Jim, the thing is this, right? There's no objective reason for my point of view that I should have sat in the back, which is what I thought. And there's no objective reason for her to sit in the front, right? These are both cultural artifacts. And I'm not saying culture is not important. It doesn't matter. It does allow us to flow. My only point is that each of us had been taught something, either explicitly or implicitly, about the proper way to behave in that situation. And it seemed to me, I drew an analogy to family. We grow up in America and we're inundated with this idea, your family, your family, your family. But the idea that I need to look out for, love my family simply because they're my family has no more root in reality than does where somebody should sit in the vehicle.
Right. When I get into a vehicle, it's like, well, who's going to be talking to whom? It's the very practical. You haven't seen this guy in a while. Why don't you sit next to him? Or I get car sick, or I want the view, or I called shotgun. I'm not wedded to any particular rule, and I must admit, I will go on the seat of my pants based on the circumstances of the moment. But you're absolutely right. Now let's consider social norms, which is exactly the next place I was going. The assault on neoliberalism, as they call it, is based on the idea that somehow they can arrest social development, moral development, cultural development by means of law. In other words, it's short of a censorship, right? There's very little the state can do to stop progress in social thinking. For example, about divorce and, say, abusive families and things like that. They want to arrest social development of humanity at a certain state in time. It's no better than the South Park member berries. They long for a time where things were different, a quieter time, maybe without AI, so these people have no problem being against high tech, and that means, of course, being anti-market, anti-capitalistic, and they're willing to use the gun of the state to arrest social progress. It cannot really be done short of a censorship, and even with a censorship, there's going to be change. There's going to be, the ban on Aristotle during the Middle Ages did not prevent Aristotle from leaking through. So even censorship is problematic in that regard. But don't mistake and don't pretend it's anything but what I just said here. These people like J.D. Vance and Patrick Deneen want to use the gun of the state to arrest social progress, to freeze us into a state of social norms that they think is appropriate from the past. What they don't like is the changing social norms at all. You could tell, a funny thing over the last 45 years ago, when I would say, or just 40 years ago, I would say to my DA colleagues, the next big civil rights issue, I said, was gay rights. And they said, you're crazy. And I said, yeah, but in our lifetime, we'll probably see, the 14th Amendment applied to it and gay marriage. That's exactly what happened. I had to wait, 15, 20 years for it to all happen. But after 50, and I turn around and say, look, see, it happened. Now, there are people who didn't like that. That has this little, it just bothered them a little. That's what these anti-liberal people are. They're bothered by social change happening without the direction of the gun of the state. And they somehow believe that the gun of the state can freeze any progress in social norms.
Okay, so I would put these post-liberals, whatever, they talk about the common good, which, whatever. We'll get to that in a second. But I want to differentiate now. I want to talk first individualism, then collectivism. What is individualism? And I sent you, by the way, articles in my view, two of the greatest representatives of Western liberalism in the history of the world, Ayn Rand and Ludwig von Mises.
Yes. Well, in the context of social sciences, Mises is invaluable, but surely Ayn Rand nails it.
Oh, she's better, yeah.
Yeah, she nails it like no one ever has. She clears the clutter from the false alternative here about individualism. And this is something that the Patrick Deneens and J.D. Vances just grasp onto. The false idea of individualism as some kind of atomism that could only be realized alone on a desert island. No. Individualism does not say that cooperation is a bad thing. We say cooperation is a good thing if it's voluntary, if it's chosen. Individualism is all about the freedom of the individual, not putting him on a desert island or in opposition to. And in fact, there is no conflict between the good of the individual. What is that ridiculous Star Trek line? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Well, that posits a conflict, and it's that inherent conflict that these people assume. Now, notice we see that all the time on the left. The individual just has to knuckle under with his interests for the good of the whole, for the good of the community. We hear that all the time on the left, but it's also rampant on the right, and especially in this category of right-wing intellectuals, and I put that in scare quotes, they absolutely do believe just that the individual has to subordinate his interests to the needs of the family, the community, the collective, the nation state. Right. And if you don't like it, tough. See, what liberalism represents is the idea that the individual is the important social unit, that there can be no conflict. Anything that's bad for the individual must, right, a fortiori, if I can use the logic term, be against the group. The individual is the only producer because only individuals think. The individual is the only consumer. The people say, no, what do you mean? I can consume, let's take the most collective of property, the road. No, there are only so many wares that road has. And when I use it, I have exclusively arrogated that use of that piece of asphalt for myself. It's not just every bite of an apple. It's every drive across a piece of asphalt is individually consumed. The only relevant, for purposes of social science, going back to Mises, the only relevant unit here is the individual. The individual is the one who makes value in the context of Austrian economics. This is the important thing. Only the individual makes value judgments. The free market price merely represents a sum of the value assertions of a variety of individuals. If I don't go and I don't buy the product, I'm making a value assertion right there. Okay, and it's the sum of those value assertions by individuals And if you lose sight of the individual, you're losing sight of everything. There can be no conflict between the interests of the individual and the collective. If someone does say so, then what they're doing is they're providing some fancy rationalization for going around to squash individuals, to remove individuals who are in their way or are inconvenient or that we need the money from. That's all it is. It's just the list of sacrificial victims.
Jim, I have had a fly. It's been following me around all day. I've tried to kill it. I can't get it. I tried spraying it with, I don't know, scrubbing bubbles. That didn't work, and it's harassing me. So if you see me doing like this, I'm not crazy. There's no MS or any wild thing. I just have a fly that is hell-bent on harassing me. Yeah, so as I'm thinking, when I'm laying down at night, right, this to me, it may seem outside of the discussion, but to me, it's very pertinent. As I'm contemplating my life, my future, my own mortality, what I want to do for the rest of my time here on Earth, I'm alone in that. Nobody else is thinking my thoughts. Nobody else is making my decisions. It's me. And the decisions that I make are going to be good or bad for me. They're going to be affecting me, right? Now, of course, the collectivists, and we'll get to that in a second, will come along and say, yes, but your decisions affect others. And they what they end up doing is using a very nuanced, shall we say, meaning of the term effect. For instance, they'll say, well, but if you're a drug addict, your family is going to be upset by it. Okay, but I'm not forcing them. I'm not, and that's where Ayn Rand, I think, with her notion of rights, and the only way to truly violate them is by initiating force or fraud, right? So with that said, if I'm not doing that, then I'm not affecting other people in any relevant way.
It's so funny. If I have a crush on someone, what does that imply?
Please don't tell me it's me.
No, well, no. I'm just sorry to let you down, but it's not you. But if and this is just a hypothetical anyway. But if I have a crush on someone, what does it oblige her to do?
Nothing.
Nothing. So what these people are in effect saying is that I am the slave of my family because they care about me. If my friends and family care about me, then my life is simply to satisfy them, to make them happy, to be Peter Keating to his mother, Mrs. Keating. That is exactly their view of life. Yes, never disappoint your mom. Because gosh, if you don't become a doctor, you really crush her. Now it's true, being a drug addict is different than not choosing. But where do we draw the line? In other words, their feelings of caring for me doesn't require me to do and comply with them.
Whoa. Hold on 1 second. Hold on.
Yeah.
Because I would disagree with you there. Because I think in principle, it's the exact thing. The principle is the same between the fundamental there is you're disappointing somebody else, whether it be through your drug addiction or through getting another career, whatever. I agree that they're different actions necessarily, but the fundamental there is the same. It's that somebody else is disappointed with your behavior. And there are those who would want to rob you of the right to do that, to disappoint others.
That's exactly it. And that's what I mean. They want to use the force of the state to enforce their social norms. And whether it's a really bad decision like being a drug addict or anything else, say you don't decide to have kids, say you decide not to get married, say you decide to be gay, say you decide to, right? Not that being gay is completely a choice. In any case, what I'm saying is that what they want to do is enforce social norms, moral norms, which cannot be enforced at the point of a gun because the moral is the chosen. If you pull out your gun, Mr. Vance or Dr. Deneen, what you're doing is you're in fact, there are a lot of things that you're doing all at once, but no one can deny what you're trying to do is impose your idea of what a good life is on all of us. And if we don't go along with the, Currier and Ives engraving that you've got designed for the future of, the future, yesterday's future is how they're looking at it. Some quaint, what is that Twilight Zone episode where the guy goes back in his mind to this idyllic 1800s time? That's basically their fantasy. And they believe they can do this at the point of a gun, whether you like it or not.
Right. And well, I'm going to talk about collectivism first, and then I want to tie the post-liberals to the commies. So what is collectivism fundamentally?
Collectivism is the belief that the group, and this is the thing, the group can be variously defined. The group is the important unit of analysis. If individualism in the social science context is the belief that the individual is the supreme unit of analysis, the methodological unit of analysis of the individual. What's good for the individual is good for society, is the way Rand and Mises go about their thinking. Collectivists say no. What's good for the community, the race, the tribe, the nation, you name the species, you name the collective. What's good for that group is what's supreme. And of course, it builds in, as I say, this notion that there's an inherent conflict. That yes, in order to make this collective omelet, we have to break a few individual eggs. And that's the point. The whole point is that the individual must knuckle under and be subordinated to the needs of the group based on the assumption that there's this necessary conflict. But it comes in many varieties. Racism, as Ayn Rand says, is the lowest and crudest form of collectivism. I'm superior or you're inferior because of the color, the pigmentation of my skin, which is perfectly absurd, but it's appropriate for the perceptual level. If you're really a highfalutin intellectual, you'll be like Marx and you'll say it's a matter of social class. You're bourgeoisie, you're proletariat. If you're really sophisticated, you'd be one of these, intersectionalists of today, and you'll say, well, let's see, it's because you're a lesbian, you go down all the victim categories. So the collectivists will define victim categories and define them in such a way, right? And it has nothing to do with reality even. If I were to say, look, but this individual he wasn't mistreated. No, that's not the point. I can find dozens of counterexamples on each side of their collective analysis. They will be indifferent to that. Utterly indifferent. Well, those are the individual omelets that we got to break along the way. And so, and Hitler was even more explicit in his it's always altruism. See, the sacrifice of the individual is what collectivism's all about. And the moral mechanism that's universally behind that is this doctrine of self-sacrifice being the moral ideal. And so we always have this, you have a duty to sacrifice, and you have no grounds to complain if we're making you sacrifice for our vision of yesterday. That is what these Deneen types, this assault on neoliberalism is all about. It is an assault on the most fundamentally American ideas. And that's why, you really would have to dress it up as if Thomas Jefferson and James Madison would go along with this, when of course it's the very opposite of the ideology that founded America, individualism.
Yeah. So in regard to the collectivists, what is a interesting thing is what you picked up on is the heritage Americans are collectivists, but the collective that they care about is isolated toward, well, if you're born and you can trace your history back to America. Now you might have your black nationalists or, the Nation of Islam, and they would tie it toward your Africanness. Like I knew a guy from the Nation of Islam in prison who said that he would never let a light-skinned black guy teach his children. So the light-skinned black guy was excluded from his collective. So there's always some means by which you can, arbitrarily sort of cut people out of the given collective that you want. But the point is seeing people as wholes.
Think about that. All human progress involves someone doing something that hasn't been done before, something out of the norm, something different, something against the grain, right? Their reflexive attitude is stop it, shut it down, use force if necessary to prevent that guy from doing his funny thing. But of course, if we prevent people from doing that funny thing, Galileo never discovers his science. The Wright brothers never give us the airplane. Some Canadian scientists can't give us antibiotics. Ooh.
I tried. I didn't get them.
She did make a great gong sound.
It did. I didn't anticipate that.
Right. But all progress involves swimming against the current. And it's this swimming against the current that really bothers your social collectivist conservative of this kind. Can't have people thinking for themselves. And that's where it starts. All thinking is done by the individual, of course. All new ideas start in one mind. And
Jim,
that one mind has to convince the rest of the world, usually against all of its habits and, inertia, to do something different. That's what bothers them. Now, is it always good? No. Sometimes bad ideas take hold, sometimes good. But the point is, they're trying to arrest any change, any progress, and enforce their view of the good life. And it's like some painting out of the past, some idyllic world that never really existed, by the way, like in the 50s. Because, if you point out to people, things weren't perfect. And socially speaking, things were not perfect in the 50s. These people go, well, what do you mean? We can at least,
Yeah. What do you mean? Haven't you seen Leave It to Beaver?
Leave It to Beaver? And that's
Come on. Don't you know husbands and wives really did sleep in separate beds at that time?
And with one leg on the ground.
Yeah. When I took social psychology, Jim, one of the things that struck me about the experiments, whether they be the Milgram experiments, the Stanford prison experiments, the case of Kitty Genovese, whatever, is they're always dealing with percentages, right? It's never, okay, all things remaining equal, you heat water to 212 degrees, it boils. Right? It's sea level. When it's social psychology, it's a different story. It's 60% of respondents acted in this way, or 71%. And I'm not saying there's no value in that. But what I am saying is that it goes to what Mises would say, is that you could tell me that 50 people did something. That tells me nothing about what this individual is going to do in this particular occasion.
See, that's the thing. When we do social study correlations, we can't really get a cause in the same way. What's interfering? Volition. I can give you correlations. As Ayn Rand puts it, people choose the reasons that cause their actions. Ayn Rand's view of free will is not opposed to the idea of causation. What she's saying is we're selecting among the causes that can be operative. We select the reason why. Okay, I go to the store. Why am I going to the store? Why am I working out? Well, I'm going to the store because I need milk in the house, but I got to work out. I haven't worked out in the last 2 days. So I'm going to choose the motivation, the cause, the reason. You say, well, you worked out because you were concerned about, yeah, but I was the one who activated that cause by choice. And so it was inevitable once I made the choice and started acting. That's what reality is. So because causality has to be understood in groups, especially, my God, in an entirely different way, correlation does give you some information, but you're never going to exclude all the causes like you would in a physical science experiment, such that you could say, oh, wait, that's the cause that'll always cause all humans to. The correlation may be interesting. People are motivated when this condition happens to act this way. Of course, people aren't blind. They're actually selecting the reasons that will motivate and cause their action. And that's exactly how it's working. So
I want to give an example, Jim, of collectivism in action, tribalism, more to the point. Now, I've been really fascinated and interested, and I'm going to get to the Clancy case because I want to ask you about that in a second, but I've been very interested in the phenomenon of information processing and how people get their information, and the abundance of false information that comes to be accepted as true, and why. In that case is a great illustration. But before I get to that, this morning I see on X, I saw it once and then I put a comment, so I started seeing it quite a bit. There's a New York Post article that says a study shows that leftist violence is fueled by transgender ideology. So I looked into it a little bit. Okay. So first of all, the experiments were done by a right-wing professor from Rutgers, the Manhattan Institute, a right-wing organization, and some other right-leaning people. Now that I'm not saying that negates the study. The study should be judged on its merits, of course. The study was a one-sample survey that measured correlations. It didn't even measure causation, nor did the authors of the study claim it measures causation, nor has the actual study even been released for peer review yet. Nevertheless, you have an abundance of right-wingers because the headline said shocking study, and they're like, shocking, huh? We knew that. And it led me to put a post out there today that said, if every news story, every scientific experiment, and every experience you have confirms what you already think, you might want to reassess. Because I tell you what, as an avid defender of laissez-faire capitalism, I can't say that every single evidence, every piece says, yes, adopt laissez-faire capitalism. That's what you should do. There is counter evidence. And if you just ignore it, you don't know any goddamn thing.
Well, that's true.
Right? I mean, well, evidence isn't proof. Well, you know what I mean? So just because there's a piece of evidence, there's some unscrupulous businessman here. That's not proof of the proof, well, exactly. but it could be evidence in a given context. My only point is that these people get confirmed in every belief they have. And so often it's around a tribal identity. So these guys are they're conservative Republican right-wing identity, and they've already labeled the transgender other as they're doing these things, and they see this and it's like, aha, yep, see. And it's a very disheartening
what's
thing
so
to me.
Funny is that in recent decades, all of these studies done in the social sciences, and I'm going to put that in scare quotes too, so many of them are just simply unreplicatable. And so many of them, a huge percentage, are just completely bogus, pseudoscience. I mean, a huge percentage, even if it's just part of what what repeated studies have shown. But in any event, and of course, when it's lefty social studies, the right will jump on, oh, your BS academic study that really doesn't prove that. But when they've got a study that confirmed their previous bias, because they already knew trans was behind all the violence, right, left-wing violence. Okay, well, that's, on the face of it, you have to be skeptical of things like that, ladies and gentlemen, because, I get the impression sometimes that the social science studies are designed to manipulate opinion. And let's face it, that's partly what they're doing here, is trying to manipulate opinion. Look at how they jump on it and are already spinning it. When, of course, we would need, and a trend like that, consider, you've got 2 or 3 cases of trans recently being involved in violence. Okay, that's it. Let's jump on it. Instead of waiting for, hey, wait a minute, is this really the long-term trend? Is this really, they have no appreciation for what a statistic really would mean. So if they're saying this is what is the dominant cause of left-wing political violence, hold your,
It also might not be the relevant variable. Even if you can show that there's a rise in transgender violence.
The other thing.
Well, what if you were to isolate and say, and I'm not predicting this, this is a hypothetical to make a point, but what if we were to look at groups that are targeted by right-wing influencers, and we could find that is actually the independent variable, right? And it could be, the point is when you do science, you look for the controlling variable. What is the actual cause of things? And it's very easy to mix up noise with reality, with what is actually occurring, especially when you're talking about an online survey that's conducting one sample.
Online survey, people, think about it. One survey, one sample, and they neither have the numbers nor the duration, I would argue, to make any kind of sound, even correlative assessment.
Okay, now I want to use that, and I want to kind of pivot to the Clancy thing, because you've been watching. I haven't watched. I've just been reading a lot about it. Not even, and the thing is, Jim, I have no strong opinion either way. Guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, not guilty. I don't know. What's fascinated me about it is how many people think they're experts on the subject. Megyn Kelly posted this morning, her behavior is not indicative of somebody with psychosis. Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly. I didn't know you were a forensic psychologist. Right? I mean, it's just, there's so many people that say things like, one person says, if SSRIs caused killing, then everybody on them would be killing. That's like saying if smoking caused lung cancer, everybody who took a drag would have cancer.
Of
course not. But people, the first step is, I don't know what the first step is. I do know that there's a grouping of people. They go into their various, and I haven't seen the TikTok loonies because I don't go on TikTok, but I've heard they're out there who say she didn't even do it, even though she admitted it. The husband says she did it, the cops, everybody. But so that I would put them in the same category as collectivist loonies. You've come to a conclusion. It's not based on anything, but yet you're hell bent on it. And I mean, people are like losing friends over this shit.
Insane. First of all, the point you make is a really good one. Why are you getting so emotionally involved in this, right? Can't you? And again, with every criminal case, I have to say, it hits me this way. People will stake out strong positions knowing precious little about the evidence. And this has been a battle that I've been fighting for decades, Michael, where people will stake out before they know crap about the case. They'll stake out these really completely dogmatic positions on the point before they even know what's going on. That is distressing right there. They didn't, but 35 years ago, they didn't need social media to do that. They were able to believe that up is down, and it's funny. I'm not saying that the internet hasn't made it worse, where people are feeding into each other's nonsense and believing nonsense more readily because they see it there on the internet. But people could believe all manner of bizarre things long before there was an internet. If you looked at the polls, for example, I'll just take O.J. Simpson in the 1990s, because it was really at the dawn of the computer era before the internet can be blamed. African Americans thought he was innocent. Non-African Americans pretty much all thought he was guilty. Now, that's an interesting phenomenon that needs to happen. Why is there such a radically different assessment of evidence? Let me suggest that at least one of the parties isn't just using assessment of evidence to come to their conclusion. Or take longstanding because this is relevant to the liberals. In the 1960s, I was watching the other day with my wife. It was on late at night. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? A movie made in the 1960s.
Great movie.
Interracial Marriage. We love Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. Marvelous. Talk about embodiments of the liberals.
Wait a second, but not Sidney Poitier?
And Sidney Poitier and the guy who plays the Monsignor and the lady who plays Tilly, Wheezy. They're just all fantastic, the actors in that. Anyway, the introducer of the movie indicated a poll was done in the early 1960s. Something like 3/4 of all Americans opposed interracial marriage. As late as the 1960s. A few years later, they do the same poll. It's completely flipped. Social attitudes have totally done a 180 on that very point. Now, it's strange to me. It really is. I mean, I remember as a little kid, my parents would have interracial couples over and socialize with them. I mean, I thought nothing of it myself, and I didn't realize just how wonderful my parents were, I guess, in the American context of the 1960s. But the point is that social attitudes, our conservative friends want to freeze social attitudes in place, if necessary, by the point of a government gun. Now, if I were to say misogyny, they would say, oh, no, we're in favor of interracial marriage. Why? Because that idea has already become so solidified. How did Mark put it the other day? He quoted Buckley, a conservative, someone who stands athwart, right? Probably says, stop, halt, or whatever. That is it. That's what they want to do. And not against economic interventionism like socialism. No, against liberal social change in people's attitudes. It's a funny thing. Among my friends, I have some strange social attitudes. I don't like boxing. A bunch of my guy friends love fights, boxing, wrestling. I don't like it. It just rubs me the wrong way. If you were to press me on it, I'd say, yeah, I don't think it's healthy. It's like watching a bullfight. I don't like that either. Would I pass laws? No. Keep your goddamn laws out of these situations. But if social progress and attitudes, and people are going to get angry at me, I think one day people will look back on, say, a sport that says the goal of the thing is to hit the guy in the head so bad that he passes out and is knocked out. Boy, that's the big win you want to go for in boxing. Will be considered rather barbaric, just as we would consider bullfighting rather barbaric.
I tend to agree, but
Yes.
And they say everything after the butt is bullshit, but I promise this won't be. I once watched a replay of, I think it was the first one, but I could be wrong. I think it was the first Ali Frazier fight. And
I grew up with that. Don't get me wrong. I saw those fights.
Right. And it was so barbaric, but at the same time, it was just such a testament to the indomitable will of two men, that what they put each other through in that fight to make it to the end. It's so admirable.
I admire there. That's the funny thing. You could put me in a time machine and go back to Roman gladiatorial combat. Well, you might not die, but there's a pretty good chance you'll die, or there's a pretty good chance you'll lose a limb. Can I still admire the skill of the fighter? Yeah. Boy, he was brave. Boy, he took a beating and he came right back and he killed the other guy. Now, am I in favor of gladiatorial combat, even though I can detect the tenacity, the virtue, the courage, the skill of some gladiator? Boy, he was a badass bullfighter. Until he tortured the beast to death, he could, kneel down with his back to. He was so brave, he could kneel down with his back to the. So, in order to demonstrate his machismo, and isn't it cool that he demonstrated just what a reckless son of a bitch he was? Okay.
So, speaking of collectivist drivel, the Democrats seem to have a little problem with language. Evidently, their cisgenderism and Latinx or Latinx, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. I the first time I saw that, I'm like, what the hell is this? But intersectionality and birthing persons. And I remember in prison, when I used to call home, it used to say, you have a collect call from Michael, an inmate at a Connecticut correctional institution. Somewhere along the change from, you have a collect call from Michael, an incarcerated individual. I don't even know. It's like, I was watching Curb Your Enthusiasm the other day, and Larry David says he uses the handicap bathroom, and he tells the guy, I use the handicap bathroom. And the handicap guy says to him, excuse me, it's physically challenged. or it's this, he said something. I don't remember the exact, it doesn't matter. But the point is, you're saying the same goddamn thing.
Yeah, there was that council meeting recently that got some play, went a little viral. Person said homeless, and the further left, he said unhoused. And
unhoused.
Myself, unhoused homeless. I don't.
Right.
I can't even find a connotative difference. With some words, English has all these synonyms for being undressed. Undressed, naked, nude, so naked is kind of nasty sounding. Nude is kind of artistic. Undressed is very clinical, like at the doctor's. So we have different, but how unhoused, homeless? Is there even a connotative difference?
No. And we have this thing. I remember watching an episode of The Jeffersons once, and there was this uncle that they kind of thought was kissing up to Whitey type thing. And there was a few things that happened. One, George gets a phone call from a white guy he's trying to do business with, and he couldn't remove his lips from the guy's ass. And then the other guy says, wait a second, George, when I try to make ways in the world by being friendly with white people, you call me an Uncle Tom. And he goes, but it's different. So then Lionel comes in, and the uncle says, well, Negroes. And Lionel says, it's black. And I'm laughing because at this point it already was no longer black. When I saw this episode, it became African American, right? And the uncle said to him, "I'm sorry." He said, "I've just gotten first over getting called the other thing, and I'm just getting used to this. And now you want me to change to something else." But it goes from colored to Negro to black to African American. And I'm not saying these changes are never warranted or never good, but in essence, you're saying the same thing. So now you can't say a colored person, but you can say people of color as if there's a real difference.
See, they want to manipulate. See, language is really important. Concepts. We have a really great talk about words, by the way. If you haven't seen our conversation on words.
We did. It was great on the Michael
check
Liebowitz show. Yes.
And why are words so important? Precisely because concepts are a means of understanding the world. you control language, you can actually control the parameters in which people are going to think and discuss the issue, right? Ayn Rand and George Orwell and other thinkers have been all on this, but no one understood the importance of concepts like Miss Rand. In any case, yeah, so it's the same concept, same reference that are being unified there altogether. It's just a different sound, but we didn't like the, emotional surroundings of that sound. Okay, does that really change the reality? No, it's not. See, you don't need a new word. You don't need a new concept unless there's a new reality you need to get at with that word. If you're just changing the word for the same thing, what you're saying is it's not the reference that were the problem. It was the whole emotional atmosphere around being, quote, a Negro. Oh, I see. So at the time when people used the word Negro, there were attitudes you didn't like and you want to give it. Yes, we need clear the decks. We need a whole new attitude when it comes to the referring to the very same units. Okay.
So, but evidently this is backfiring because most people don't relate to birthing persons and unhoused individuals and justice impacted folks.
Criminally challenged, criminally law affected individuals.
Listen, look, Jim, all my life,
they're not convicts. They're
yeah, I always thought I was a run-of-the-mill criminal. No.
Well, see,
I was justice impacted, bitch.
That can describe what you're talking about. And if you've got a simple word that can describe the thing you're talking about, be happy with it. Now, look, let's be fair. When it goes from colored to Negro to black to African American, it's hard for me to see what really the progress is that's being made. If someone goes around calling an adult African American boy,
right,
that's offensive and an offensive use of language. Or if someone uses the N-word, right? Because we have known now for more than a century just how awful it is.
And that was always used in a derogatory.
Always derogatory.
Yeah.
And it's now common knowledge just how horrible that word's effect has been. So, yeah, there are times when language can be just simply offensive and racist and irrational. Don't get me wrong. Even just with the connotation of the word. You called him boy? Really? He's an adult male, just like you, and you called him a boy. That is, on the face of it, offensive. Okay? You're calling him an inferior, in effect. So, yeah, I don't want to say that language can't be offensive or, there isn't a responsible use of language. On the other hand, if you are just renaming homeless to unhoused or woman, mother to birthing person, I mean, it's really, you've gotten crazy now.
Yeah, why I find that's a really interesting one to me, Jim. And I'm just thinking of it now. It just became interesting to me right this moment because birthing person or mother, what is the argument? That, well, mother applies only to a woman, but you're claiming the person is a woman anyway. Or maybe you're saying or why not just say if it's a trans guy, a woman that's becoming a man, why not just say men can be mothers? I mean, if you're going to do that, why does it have to be this way as opposed to the other way? It's very bizarre. And somebody pointed out to me, some of that stuff might be legitimate. But the idea that you're going to get mad at people because they haven't picked up on the latest change,
crazy.
That's insane.
I'll go further. You know what I was saying about, the synonyms, in effect, replacing the others. When it comes to the use of the actual term male or female for a trans person of the biologically opposite sex, the only time I'm sympathetic, to be just perfectly honest, are people who have real body dysphoria. It is a real condition. One of my dearest friends in my life was trans. Long before it was interesting to the media, long before it was interesting to left-wing pundits, for years, this person was dealing with their body dysphoria. And it was a very significant, serious. What did I call this person? Him. I did. Okay. because it's like the boy with race. See? But once you tell me that, no, I can identify as whatever I choose to identify with, and I'm not even going to define what a woman is. Okay, now I know you're just doing it for pure subjectivism reasons. And there are such people out there arguing that woman is anything that anyone chooses to identify as, so long as they use that woman, a word woman. And I refuse to define it precisely because anyone can subjectively own it.
Jim,
even if you're, a 7 foot tall basketball player with a beard. Okay, that now is come to the point where if it is purely subjective, I'm not going to knuckle under to your use of language.
No, and maybe I'm just making a distinction without a difference. I don't know. It's all very new. But I draw a difference between if Jim Valliant asks me, is this person, say it's a man that identifies as a woman. Right. If Jim says to me, is that a man or a woman? I'm going to say a man. Right. But if that person wants me to refer to him as she, I don't really have an issue with it. I don't care. Like if it's going to make you feel better, and this is how you want to live, I don't really care.
What's funny is that you find out my trans friend. I assumed that my trans friend was the gender presented, and so it was always him. It was a biological female, so I'm always him until I find out. And then with him, after the conversation, it's like him to him. But then when I'm talking to Holly about him, it just comes out because I'm now used to.
Yeah, that happened to me recently where we were talking about somebody, Ellen Page, and I said him, her. I was trying that because that was ancillary to my point. And then somebody comes in, there's no him, her. That's a her. And I'm like, okay, technically, yes, you're correct. I get it. You're right. But that's not the fundamental point here. I'm not evading reality. I'm simply acknowledging that that's what this person wants. And I don't see that as a huge problem.
Right. And knowing so well my trans friend, I knew that my trans friend was absolutely clear about it in his own mind, if you will. Right. No, I am a biological female. No, there's no two ways about it. In one sense, I'm her. And he would tell you that whole thing. Now, I really have this issue with being in a female body. All my values are, different. I need, because now this is the other thing. An honest trans person will say, no, there's a big difference between male and female, an objective factual difference. Otherwise, my desire to be this specific gender would make no sense.
Yes. Now, what about when they think they play these gotcha games? What is a woman? And the interesting thing to me is, well, what if you were to say a woman is anybody born with a vagina? Okay, what about a hermaphrodite? Well, is a hermaphrodite a woman?
Well, hermaphrodite is specifically the borderline case. Because if it is physical, nearly all people, and I mean nearly all, hermaphrodism is such a rare thing. It is an infinitesimally rare thing.
Yeah.
And, obviously with our experiences, nearly everyone fits into one of these categories.
Yes.
Physically, it has nothing to do with whether you're gay, straight, celibate, sexually active, quite independent. There's simply a physical reality that subsumes 99.9% of all human beings. And if that's what we mean by male and female, and that's exactly what we mean by male and female. It is a very easy concept that comes not directly, it's not one of the very first concepts we form, but we're pretty darn young. We don't even need to know where babies come from. We don't even know a thing about chromosomes, boy, girl, and it's a very basic concept based on a physical reality, an observed physical reality. That concept does not change.
Sure. I agree with that, Jim.
What we do for example, we will have concepts that are related where the modifier will dramatically change the meaning of the concept. And that's why we have the term trans, which must be included, it seems to me.
Yes.
You are a trans male, a trans female.
Yeah, my only point, Jim.
Call you what you want to be called. And you have a real condition. Under those conditions.
But my point here is that I would be willing to bet that for those who play that game, define what a woman is, because they think they're playing gotcha is that I could turn them into knots. What is a man? A man is somebody with an XY chromosome. Okay, what about an XYY? What about somebody with Klinefelter syndrome?
Well, that's easy though. But you see, the hermaphrodite and the double X.
It's a different one. Yeah. Or what about what if somebody's got double XY?
Right.
What do you say then? I mean, you have variations.
You do.
I think to me the variations are irrelevant because we're dealing with, like you said, 99.9%. I'm only saying that the people who think they can play this gotcha game.
Right.
Don't really want to get into that game.
If a door is just slightly ajar, does that undermine the concept of open and closed?
No.
Right. That's the key here.
No. And Jim, here's the thing. You are very precise.
I tried.
In the use of concepts. Not as precise as me, but very precise.
Well, I'm not as pedantically fastidious. Let me put it that way.
Not as persnickety?
Persnickety.
Right. But I've had people that get so upset about this. Why can't you just define what a woman is? Okay, can you define it? But these people are not precise. My point isn't that they're technically wrong on the issue. My point is that this is not something they give a flying fuck about in 99% of instances.
Right.
They don't care about conceptual precision. No. But when all of a sudden, when it's a bias, now it's of the utmost importance. It's like the people who say, you have to, gays are immoral because the Old Testament says so. Okay, the Old Testament also calls for you to be stoned if you work on a Saturday.
Right.
All of a sudden, you're not so hip to follow the Old Testament.
Food, blaspheming the name of God, you can get you stoned. All kinds of things can get you killed.
Yes.
It's a slave society. Yeah.
I have to find yesterday's question. You, of course, Jim, are doing the capitalist thought of the day because, well, I make up that rule as I go along. And, we're up to 980 subscribers, 20 away from 1,000.
Just 20. Come on,
Just
people.
20. Just 20. That's, man. Oh. Okay, what was yesterday's question? Mark asked what the Democrats should do in relation to if they take power in relation to Donald Trump. Jim Valliant, the first one to answer the question, says they ought not impeach, if only to break the senseless cycle, but they will. Nicole Hingle says no, they should not impeach. Steve Has Game says they should impeach, but only if it will result in a prison sentence. Impeachment cannot result in a prison sentence, so
right.
that's
only
I guess
removal from office, but you're still subject to criminal.
You can be, yeah. Never going to get enough GOP support for that, so it would be a waste of time. Ian Gilmore says if the Democrats win in November, they should go after Trump with every effective measure they have. As part of that, they should only impeach if they have the votes in the Senate to convict, which they won't. Since they won't have those votes, they shouldn't bother. In the U.S., impeachment is really dead letter law. And Steve says the House should only impeach Trump if it will actually weaken him. Of course, it will not. So, Jim, he didn't say, of course, it will not. I said that. It would likely strengthen him. Jim, capitalist thought of the day.
Society is not the product of government. Society is the product of people's thinking, valuing, choosing. Society and the social norms that we live under cannot be regulated by the state. It is something that has to occur naturally. People's attitudes about gender, about gays, about anything else has to be allowed to develop in a free environment. To get at better values, to get closer to the truth, freedom is a precondition. You cannot impose it at the point of a gun. Those who assault liberalism, those who are assaulting capitalism, and are attempting to enforce their particular values, generally medieval Catholic values, but certainly mystic old-fashioned values at the point of a gun. At the end of the day, it cannot be done. Society is the product of human thought and voluntary choices. It cannot be imposed by law. Capitalism is the system that allows people to progress precisely because it allows them to be free.
That was phenomenal. That is going to make for an awesome clip, Jim. To the audience, my question is this. What is the biggest ideological threat to Western style liberalism. And by that, I mean liberalism in the classic sense. What is the largest current ideological threat to Western style liberalism? Please go to YouTube and answer the question. It helps a lot with the algorithm. Also, if you're joining us from X, this is the Rational Alternative YouTube channel, and the show is the Capitalist Corner, every day live, every weekday live, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. Jim, thank you. Jim, tell them where they can find you while you're here, if they don't already know.
The Objectivist Media Network sometimes. I'm still doing those seminars on Leonard's Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. We're on happiness this Sunday. So, if you're interested, go over there, check it out. You can see all the old recordings we have done on it. I think they're pretty good. So even though I lead the seminars, because in part, I'm not just going to boast about me. The participants make it so as well. Very much so. In any case, I'm also active on social media, James Stevens Valliant at Facebook, answering questions there every day. Please hit me up over there if you got one.
Awesome, Jim. And I will see you tomorrow, noon Eastern time. Until then, remember to always check your premises.